Cathaoirleach, and thank you for the opportunity, Minister, to address in these surreal times the House. I must say that in my long sojourn here, I never envisaged the day I'd be coming in to see seats in Dáil Éireann roped off from members, but that's the reality we face now. Clearly, from everything we know, Minister, businesses in Ireland have never faced the sort of pressures unique that they are facing and that exist right now. And government supports are vital, remain vital and will be vital if we are to achieve our collective responsibility. Our collective role is to keep businesses and jobs afloat. So I want to use the few minutes I have to make a number of points, and these are points that have been made directly to me by businesses. I could have any number of them. I want to raise 9 particular issues. Let me start with issue number 1, which is actually the point raised by Deputy Matthews, and that is security of tenure and lease security. And I must say that we acted very, I think, decisively and clearly and rightly to protect private tenants from eviction in this time. I'm afraid we have to act with the same degree of certainty, and getting advices is not what is required. People are worried, and you rightly say that the bulk of landlords are decent, but some are not. And some leases are being terminated, and I think we need to legislate in that regard, and I'd like to hear your view on that. In terms of business rates, and there's been talks about leeway and forbearance on business rates. Let us be quite clear. We should have a clear, understandable pattern right across the country in every local authority that there will be a forbearance. In the same way as, for example, businesses are affected by 25% to access your wage subsidy schemes, they should have forbearance on rates. But that cannot be carried by local authorities. 30% plus of the revenue of local authorities is rates. So it has to be a national scheme supported by central government. The third point I want to raise is in relation to a point raised very forcibly to me by RMT, the maritime union, the union that represents seafarers. And they've raised real concerns with me that shipping companies are utilising this crisis to force sometimes compulsory redundancy or alteration of work patterns that have been hard fought and won over decades. The pay and conditions of both deck workers and port workers have to be protected, and I would like you to just take particular interest in this, and obviously it will be primarily an issue too for your colleague, the Minister for Transport. The fourth issue I want to raise is in relation to businesses and companies getting state support. It is vital, as I say, that they get that support, but it must be a condition of ongoing state support that such businesses engage with the industrial relations machinery of the state. This unparalleled crisis cannot, as I say, be simply utilised by some, a minority of companies and businesses, as a cover to undermine workers' pay and conditions. And that has to be implicit in the rules and regulations for any drawdown of supports. And in relation to the actual supports available, and many of the colleagues in their address already have talked about them. I mean, I won't recite again because they've been effectively recited by previous speakers. The actual degree of takedown, of call down of some of the supports that you have listed to all of us when we posed questions about what is available, particularly to SMEs. The actual call down has been pitifully small because when cash flow is short, when liquidity is difficult, you don't want to add significantly to your debt. And if the state, as others have said, can borrow, and the NTMA have now said they can borrow, the most recent borrowing is at 0.25%. So 1/4% they can borrow at. How can it be that they're lending on at 4 or 5%? And you wrote to me when I contacted you in relation to various companies that require supports, that the first thing you should do is go to your bank. And you said it again today. Well, I had a conversation with the director of banking of one of the largest bank, the second largest bank in the country, and the head of SME lending. And it really is, if you talk to the banks, a business as usual approach. They'll determine who might be viable. In this crisis, who might be viable. And if they give you an overdraft, the overdraft is at 8% plus interest rates. So that is no help at all to people and companies who are stuck in this situation. So we really have to be thinking in terms of the extent of the crisis, requiring not a business as usual approach, but rather an approach that says that money must be available in the same way as when the banks were faced with a crisis in 2008 and 2009. They didn't say it's a business as usual approach. They marched themselves hot foot down to Merrion Street and made it crystal clear that they wanted a complete and total bailout. And what happened? What happened? The debts of the banks were socialised and put on the backs of the people. But it is time now that realisation was enforced on the banks, that they need to pay back that debt owed in real terms to the SME sector now. And it can't be, let's determine whether you're viable in the middle of an unprecedented storm. And if you are determined by us to be viable, we will lend you money at a punitive rate. Oh, and by the way, if we give you a 3-month, now a 6-month moratorium on your repayments, we're going to add that up at the end, and all the time the interest rate is clocking. So our great forbearance is actually going to make us more money. Now that is just not the approach that's acceptable or required of the banking sector, and I ask, Minister, that you would pass that on as Minister for Business to your Cabinet colleagues. A critical issue raised to me, and I want to underscore this because I had a difficult conversation today with a very significant businessman in my own constituency, is the issue of insurance. And from a different perspective, it is the issue of liability, the duty of care. It is now going to be impossible for companies and businesses to get COVID-19 insurance. Any renewal will not include that. And for businesses to open without that insurance will be impossible. That's what they're telling me directly, because they couldn't take the risk of being liable for either their employees or their customers becoming victim of COVID-19 if they weren't insured against it. And we just have to have a solution to that. Some sort of indemnity or insurability. No more than you can't sue if you get the flu when you visit your local supermarket. So we need to address that issue, or we won't have businesses reopening when this phase passes. And I would ask you, as a matter of urgency, to look at this issue of liability in insurance in relation to it. A couple of quick other points I want to raise. My colleague Jed Nash has already raised the importance of monitoring post-COVID, when businesses start slowly to come about. And you said again today, well, this is a matter for the HSA. But does the HFA, because we're all getting individual calls from workers who are petrified sometimes. And who do they reach out to? Who's going to say? Who's going to go into the workplaces? I spoke to one individual who was working in a call centre. Now, it's since closed, but in the early stages of this. And they were terrified to give out, terrified to complain, although they were working cheek by jowl. When we unravel this, who is going to monitor and insist and ensure? And have we the capacity and the scope to do that? Two other final brief points. The regional impact will not be uniform. In the South East, as all South East authorities are telling you, half of all jobs are already affected. Will you do a regional impact analysis so that we can actually have a regional differentiated response? And my final point is in relation to seasonal businesses. I'm trying to give you a litany, but there's 9 important issues. Seasonal businesses. I come from a tourist county as well. There are some very successful businesses that don't operate in January and February. And they're now excluded from the schemes that you have put in place. What am I going to say to those who would have normally looked forward to a very successful summer season, but can't get the wage subsidy scheme supports,
Deputy.
because they didn't operate in January or February.
Thank you, Deputy.